Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. Tonight we're starting out with a report focusing on mental health, specifically conditions at Oregon's mental health hospital in Salem. It's nearly always full, and the hope is that patients are getting great care and that they're safe. But a new report reveals that's not always the case, and that is our big story tonight. A 102-page report by federal investigators from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services shows a pattern of violence and sexual assault among patients there. It also notes staff members failed to intervene. The report stated that violence between patients was so bad that some would end up in the emergency room. And investigators found no plan in place to keep incidents from happening again. There were also sexual assaults that happened at the hospital, and investigators found that staff members were handing out condoms to patients even though sexual contact is not allowed there. Investigators made an unannounced visit to the hospital's main campus in Salem that lasted about 2 weeks, from February 28th and March 14th of this year. They also checked out patients at the facility at Junction City. What they found was pretty damning. Systemic failures that represent a limited capacity on the part of the hospital to provide safe and adequate care, and that the governing body failed to ensure the provision of safe and appropriate care to patients in the hospital. They detailed a couple of incidents in that report. One was an attack on a patient by another patient back in February. A person they called patient 23 was sitting in a courtyard one day when another person, patient 22, came up behind them, put them into a chokehold, lifted them up and shook them until they lost consciousness, and then tossed them into a corner. Staff members did not see it happen, and the victim was found by another patient. The report also says the staff knew that patient 22 should be in a secluded area and away from other patients. That patient had made threats toward staff and inappropriately touched one of them. 3 days before, that patient had made statements that they were homicidal and said, "I feel like killing someone again," grab someone around the neck and strangle the F out of them. Another incident details a patient who reported having sex in the hospital sensory room. A patient reported being coerced into sex, and the hospital found that the patient and that person was unable to give consent because of their mental state. When staff members went to the room, they found an open condom wrapper. Investigators found that staff members had been handing out condoms, which confused the patients. The staff reportedly said the condoms were for self-care. A reporter asked Governor Tina Kotek about that last week, just hours after the federal report became public.
I don't know why they're handing out condoms. That was news to me. We're going to ask them why that's happening. And we have been focused on improving the outcomes for individuals at the state hospital. As you know, it's mostly a population of folks who have been connected with the criminal justice system as aid and assist and getting ready for their own defense. My primary concern is making sure what we're doing there is evidence-based. We're supporting the workforce to do it, and we're going to continue to monitor. But that particular little fun footnote was a surprise, and we'll be talking to them.
The report noted that the hospital has more than 1,000 cameras throughout the facility, but not enough people to monitor all of them, and that the cameras have blind spots. They also found that staff members were not properly securing hospital doors or being aware of what was going on with patients. All in all, they found that the hospital failed to ensure each patient's right to provision of care in a safe setting, the right to freedom from all forms of abuse and neglect, and the right to prompt and appropriate response to grievances. Those failures resulted in actual and potential physical and psychological harm to patients. For their part, the Oregon State Hospital says there are always things that they can improve, but they are dedicated to the patients. Their deadline to come up with a plan for improvement is today. After that, the plan will need to be approved by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, who will inspect them again to make sure the improvements are actually happening. Now let's get to some of your thoughts on our big story from last night. It was about a sexual assault case in Washington County where a woman was assaulted by a complete stranger in broad daylight on a MAX platform. The 19-year-old man was initially charged with a felony and a misdemeanor, but in a move that some in the legal field told me is rare, the judge stepped in and reduced the felony to another misdemeanor without any kind of deal made with the prosecutors. Instead of 90 days in jail, like the prosecutors asked for, the judge gave him 30 days. ordered him to undergo sex offender treatment, register as a sex offender, and banned him from TriMet property for 5 years. She also put him on 5 years probation, which the prosecutor did want. But the judge did drop that felony to a misdemeanor, to the surprise and disgust of the victim and the prosecutor. Now, if you missed our story, you can watch it anytime. It's on the KGW YouTube channel. The majority of your thoughts sounded a lot like this from a viewer named Glenna.
I would challenge that judge to ride to work every day on the max and see how vulnerable women are in particular. This young man is a sexual predator and needed to be locked up. In taking that away from the victim, you are taking it away from women in general who are not believed when we are attacked verbally, sexually, emotionally. Shame on her. Shame on that judge.
Dick wrote to us to say, after her, the judge, watching the actual assault on a video from start to finish, there's no denying it was intentional, and the man should have faced the felony charge. Shame on the judge.
That story on that woman, that poor woman who was diminished by the judge, infuriates me. It just shows that women do not count. I have never been so angry about anything in a very long time.
We also heard, though, from some of you who think the judge's decision was somewhat justified. Ron wrote in to say, let's start with agreement that the crime was ugly and disgusting. He needs to get a serious punishment. However, a felony conviction makes him virtually unemployable for the rest of his life. That is pretty harsh for a 19-year-old with no priors. But 30 days in jail is a joke. Another viewer on YouTube chimed in, I do not condone his actions. However, being a registered sex offender at 19 for the rest of his life will be much worse than the jail time and probation. His life is ruined. And we'll end on this one from Mark. The voting public would appreciate knowing of the judge who reduced the sentence from a felony is an elected judge, so we can vote our approval or disapproval. Well, Mark, the judge is elected. Her name is Janelle Whipper. She's up for re-election this month in the primary. That's 11 days from today. But she's running unopposed in Washington County. So unless there's a serious write-in campaign to unseat her, it appears that she will keep her position for another term, which, by the way, will last for 6 years. Now, to our drug crisis. It's been 1 week since Portland's 90-day fentanyl state of emergency ended, but the crisis has not passed. New data shows first responders showed up to nearly, get this, 200 opioid overdoses this week. Blair Best reports on a troubling trend happening around the beginning of each month. New batches of stronger drugs hitting the streets.
I bet it's kind of hard on him, you know?
A patch of shade shelters Dee Dee from the sun.
It gets really hot sometimes out here, and it is not okay.
Homeless for 20 years, she uses just about anything to get by.
I like crack, I like crystal, I like heroin, I like fetty, I like everything pretty much.
Since Monday, Portland first responders have been called to 195 opioid overdoses. That's according to data from Portland Fire and Rescue Community Health Department. It's unclear how many of those were fatal. Last month, they were called to over 1,000, more than 200 each week, often happening in Old Town, where Dee Dee stays.
That's kind of like the norm right now.
The fentanyl trade is still coming. There's a supply chain coming.
The Portland Fire and Rescue tells us overdoses typically increase at the start of each month, often when stronger batches of drugs like fentanyl hit the streets. That's what's happening now.
Oh, yeah, there is. Yeah, definitely. I've run into it a couple times. It's really kind of awful. It's horrible.
Dee Dee knows it when she sees it.
Really thick syrup, white syrup, you know. I've seen it twice. It turns into like a golden brown.
We saw it about 2 months ago at this camp in Southwest Portland.
Because it's high quality dope.
Yeah, I overdosed a couple of times. Oh, just a puff, you know, like that.
Folks are still getting a hold of it and overdosing, and we're responding.
The crisis continues just 1 week after Portland's 90-day fentanyl state of emergency ended.
There's more work to be done. We all know that. And I want you to know that the state will continue to be a key partner in the work here in Portland.
The biggest achievement to come out of the 90 days, increased collaboration between bureaus.
No, we weren't going to successfully eliminate fentanyl in the 90 days, but we were going to get a better plan.
Rick Graves at Portland Fire and Rescue says that plan is in the works.
Now the communications are being made, plans are being discussed. How can we enact a better response to address the fentanyl crisis in our community?
As they try to figure that out,
I think it's awful that they overdose.
Dee Dee does what it takes to fill her supply.
Most of the time, I just ask the drug dealer, and the drug dealer knows that I'm broke and poor.
Now, last week, the governor directed Oregon State Police to continue working with Portland Police for the next 6 months to try and track and stop fentanyl dealers. Now, earlier this year, Portland Fire and Rescue launched a new team to respond to overdoses downtown. Now, they're hoping to get more funding to expand that to be 24/7 and citywide. Blair Best, KGW News.
Thanks, Blair. Coming up next on The Story, you may have heard that we have a chance of seeing the northern lights tonight. It may not be quite like what you're seeing here, but we'll bring in Chief Meteorologist Matt Safino for a science lesson on the possibility. And we're also talking about this Mother's Day weekend heat, which really ramped up today, when The Story returns. Weather's our big story today. My goodness, isn't warm. Chief Meteorologist Matt Safino joins us now to talk a bit about the heat as well as the possibility of seeing those northern lights, right?
Yeah, absolutely, Pat. They're going off in the UK right now, so there's definitely an above average chance that we'll be able to see them here in Oregon later on tonight, of course, after it gets dark. But first, the heat, because we hit 91 today, our first 90, right? It's our first 90-degree day since the middle of September, and yes, it was a record. We had this little area of 90s around Portland, then down around Roseburg. Those are the two hot spots in the state, but even the coast, 86 at Tillamook. I saw 85 at Cannon Beach. So here are the records. Portland breaking the record that was set in 2019. That was 89 degrees. McMinnville tying a record from 1936. So some of these records have been long-standing, and these were tied. Portland broke it. So again, Hillsborough broke it as well. So again, pretty amazing warming for this time of the year. And the good news is, if you like warm weather, it's going to continue. It will be very warm in the valleys again tomorrow, although I think we'll stay just below 90. I'm forecasting 89. And then the coast begins to cool on Saturday.
Hey, I have a quick question on that, Matt. Does this mean that just kind of like our summer weather has arrived early and it's going to be hot now for the rest of the summer, or is this just kind of a one-off thing?
Yeah, I get that question a lot. No, it doesn't mean that we're just going to stay hot from now through, August. We'll get some cooler weather. In fact, it looks like some cooler weather coming back towards the end of next week. And you know how this usually goes. We warm up in early May, and then Memorial Day weekend rolls around and it's cold and wet. So hopefully that doesn't happen. I'm not forecasting that, but we've seen that pattern before. We'll cool off on Sunday for Mother's Day, which is great. So it won't be around 90 for moms and everybody preparing and taking care of the moms. It'll be around 80. So much more, tolerable temperatures as we go into Sunday and then into Monday. Okay, this is a really cool picture taken by Jim and Karen Young. Jim's a retired astronomer. He's got a great camera and he shoots pictures of the sun for us quite frequently. This is a couple of days ago and he was noticing this big batch of sunspots here, which is 16 Earth diameters, if you will. So the sun, of course, is way massive, but just for scale, that's 16 Earth diameters right there. Now, this is rotated over here by now. I'll show you that in a bit. But it's that group of sunspots that have been producing the solar storms that are sparking the northern lights, or in the case of the southern hemisphere, the southern lights, or as they're called, the aurora australis in the southern hemisphere. So here's how the northern lights form. The Earth has a magnetic field, right? And they're weakest at the poles. The magnetic field lines, that's what these lines indicate, they all converge at the North Pole and the South Pole. Every now and then, when you get a strong solar wind or a solar flare, it sends even more solar activity and particles into and through space. And if they're directed at Earth, that's when we have a chance for the northern lights. So these are protons and electrons that are emitted from the sun when we get big solar storms. They follow the magnetic field lines because they themselves are magnetic in a sense. And they enter at the poles, which is why you see the northern lights much more frequently at northern latitudes or extreme southern latitudes. But if you get a really big solar storm, especially if you get several of them, then the aurora borealis has a chance to get to for more southern latitudes, and that's what's happening tonight. The other really interesting thing is you can tell by the color that you're seeing which kind of electrons are getting excited by this solar activity and the solar particles that are coming from those solar flares. So the excitation of the collisions of the solar particles with the ions, the molecules in our atmosphere, create the lights. So the red auroras, very high up, oxygen molecules, okay? The blue auroras, nitrogen molecules. The green auroras, oxygen but lower down. And then the pink ones, that's from nitrogen as well. So super interesting. The physics of this and the chemistry of the atmosphere, the upper atmosphere, dictates what color we will see. Now, there's something called the K-index, which is kind of like the hurricane scale, 1 through 5, except this goes up to 9. For Portland to see the northern lights, we want to get the K-index to about 7, okay? Well, tonight, it's forecast to get to 8 and even 9. So this has been a severe to extreme solar storm. That's why we're pretty excited that we'll have a chance to see the northern lights. It's also called, in this case, a cannibal solar storm because there's been about 6 of these storms coming off the sun, and one catches up to the other and cannibalizes it. We had one hit today. There's another one coming at us later on tonight. So this is a picture from the southern hemisphere of the aurora borealis at a latitude similar to San Francisco. So again, we've got good potential. Look north after midnight, and it's best if you get away from the city lights, but if they're really strong, you may not need to. Pat?
Wow, that'll be fascinating. Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it. Great stuff as always. Coming up next on the story, environmental reporter Cale Williams takes us out to the Grand Ronde Reservation to show us their new health and wellness clinic. He's highlighting state-of-the-art technology that's better for the environment and the cultural nods throughout the construction. A guided tour when the story returns. Here's an interesting story. Construction crews are now putting the finishing touches on a new health and wellness clinic on the Grand Ronde Reservation. Now, we don't often highlight new buildings, but this one is a model of eco-friendliness and efficiency, while at the same time incorporating a number of cultural elements in the design. Environmental reporter Cale Williams has our story.
Every time that they walk in through those doors, there is a sense of being here that belongs to every one of us.
Kelly Rowe is the Executive Director of Health Services for the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, and she's standing in the brand new health and wellness clinic on the reservation, about an hour and a half southwest of Portland. The clinic is set to hold its grand opening in just a few days, but the tribe invited KGW to look at some of the new technology that makes the health center unique. Ryan Webb is the engineering and planning manager for the Grand Ronde Tribes.
This building was designed and constructed to really help solve some issues that we experienced during the pandemic.
They already had one clinic, and for years, it served the community well. But during the pandemic, it became difficult to provide health services and COVID testing while keeping everyone safe. The new health center has energy-efficient lighting, solar panels, and lots of windows to let in natural light. But perhaps the most important new feature is the heating and ventilation system. It's divided up into zones that can help in quarantine situations.
During a potential pandemic and airborne disease situation, we can actually shut it down and bring 100% outside air into the building.
The Grand Ronde Tribes partnered with Energy Trust of Oregon to help choose and fund the environmental upgrades.
The tribe is very committed to really being the stewards of the land like they always have been.
Cheryl Kennedy, chairwoman of the tribes, has been working on public health at Grand Ronde since the early 1980s. But the driving force behind things like the new health center took shape well before then. In the 1850s, the tribes were forced off their ancestral lands in exchange for federal recognition. And it stayed that way for nearly 100 years. But in 1954, the federal government revoked that recognition through a process called termination.
That was very difficult for most of the families because the land was taken. Termination meant they came in, they stripped you of all the land that you had, any service that was provided to you, and they said, okay, you're free, go.
For decades, that meant getting resources was difficult, especially when it came to medical needs.
The clinic that serviced Grand Ronde at that time was located in Salem. So services were non-existent here, and so if people wanted health care, they had to figure out how to travel to get there.
Kennedy joined tribal leadership right around the time they regained federal recognition in 1983.
My job was to develop all the health and human services for the tribe.
But those in-between decades when the tribes weren't recognized taught her that if they needed something, they would likely have to do it themselves.
So this is so important, laying the foundation for this where our members can come and we no longer have to be in fear that we're the orphan child, that we're not going to receive the services that other Americans and Oregonians receive.
There are nods to tribal culture throughout the clinic.
When you come into the community room, you're going to see the big round window. It represents a couple things. One is the medicine wheel, so it's a representation of the medicine wheel. It also mimics our plank house. It's the round doorway into the plank house.
The wood siding, salvaged from tribal lands that burned in the 2020 wildfires, holds significance.
We try to use everything we could from the tribe, source within, use things that were important to us as a tribe.
And there's a demonstration kitchen with upgraded audio and visual tech, so tribal members can prepare traditional foods while live streaming to folks all over the world.
And it's not just a focus on Western medicine, but really how nutritional health or cultural practice can help heal people as well.
And just outside, there's a fish pit for traditional preparation of salmon.
We have the salmon stamped outside. That's to show it's not just our first food, but it's our relationship to the water. It's our relationship to the fish. It's how important it is for us to be honoring that. Every time we walk out on that patio, we're going to see that, and it's like, yes, we have that. That's part of us.
Cale Williams, KGW News.
Thanks, Cale. Fascinating story. Hey, that's the end of our show. Thanks for watching, and remember, the story, our collective story, that never ends. It just keeps going. Timbers 360 is coming your way next, ahead of their big rivalry match with the Seattle Sounders at Provident Park on Sunday afternoon. In the meantime, enjoy your weekend, celebrate all the mothers and grandmothers in your life, and I'll see you right back here Monday at 6:30.